My name is Delia Marsh. On my second day of being a mother, I stood on the sidewalk outside my in-laws' stone gate, holding my one-day-old daughter. Beside two suitcases somebody else had packed for me. My key went into the lock half a knuckle and stopped. They had changed the locks while I was in the hospital. And I need you to hear this carefully, because it is the whole story. What stopped me was not the door. It was the 36 months I had spent keeping that family's books and knowing exactly how much money was left inside that house. My husband stood behind the second-floor window. He did not open it. Then a gray Camry pulled to the curb, and my mother got out with a silver-haired man I had never seen in my life, and a green folder. Inside that folder was a name I had looked at 36 times in 3 years and had never once read. This is a channel for women who keep their receipts. If family, boundaries, and the price of belonging are your kind of story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, and subscribe. Now let me take you all the way back. I grew up in Harrow Bend, in half of a duplex on Garnet Street, with my mother, Ruth Marsh. My father left when I was 3. What I have of him is a denim jacket and the smell of spearmint gum, and I'm fairly sure the jacket comes from a photograph. My mother never ran him down and never chased him, which tells you most of what you need to know about Ruth. People assume a child without money wants toys. I had enough toys. What I wanted was plural nouns. The Whitlocks are coming Sunday. The Ainsleys are at the lake. We were never plural. My mother and I were 2 singular nouns sharing one address. When I was 9, I asked her to buy a 3rd chair. We had 2. I told her it was in case somebody came. She looked at me a second longer than the question deserved, and then she bought it second-hand oak, one leg shorter than the others. It stood against that kitchen wall for 22 years. Nobody ever sat in it. Remember that chair? We're going to come back for it. My mother spent 30 years as an escrow officer at the title company downtown. 30 years of reading documents other people were too excited to read. Young couples buying first houses, farmers refinancing, big families quietly mortgaging summer places they'd owned for generations. And she had one commandment, repeated through my whole childhood like a pledge. Read it before you sign it, and if they won't let you read it, that's your answer. I want to be fair to my mother and to my younger self at once, because both things are true. Ruth Marsh was hard to love. She did not hug, she inspected. She did not ask how my day was, she asked how much tread was left on my tires. She left food in the refrigerator labeled by day of the week and considered the subject closed. I grew up believing I was being maintained rather than loved. And that is precisely why I later went looking for a family that knew how to perform love. I had been raised inside a system. I wanted a show. Every town like Harrow Bend has a family like the Whitlocks. The name was on the furniture store downtown. It was on a brass plaque at the library, under a sentence about generosity. It was on the founder's wall at the country club. Charles Whitlock waved from a convertible in the 4th of July parade. Eleanor Whitlock chaired the Heritage Committee. Every Christmas, they took a 3-generation photograph in front of the fireplace, and it somehow ended up in the paper. When people in Harrow Bend said that name, their voices did a small bow in the middle of the sentence. I was 12 when I asked my mother, over meatloaf in our half of the duplex, why our family couldn't be more like the Whitlocks. She didn't look up from her plate. "We don't buy names, honey," she said. "We buy ground." I rolled my eyes, the way 12-year-olds are legally required to. But here is what I didn't have the eyes to see. There was no envy in her voice. None. There was something else in there instead, dry and knowing. It was the tone she used at work when a customer bragged about a deal she had already read the papers on. It was the voice of a woman who had spent 30 years at the escrow desk of a small town, watching every big name's paperwork cross her counter, one signature at a time. My mother knew things about the castles of Harrow Bend the way a plumber knows things about beautiful houses. I never thought to ask what. It took me 19 more years to ask. By the time I did, I was standing on a sidewalk, holding everything I still owned. I met Peter Whitlock because of a spreadsheet. I keep books for small businesses. I have since I was 23, self-employed. My name on the door of a one-room office. Marsh Ledger Works. Whitlock Home Furnishings hired me to untangle 4 years of inventory accounts. And the manager assigned to sit with me was the owner's son, 32 years old, sleeves rolled, apologizing for the state of the filing cabinets before I'd even opened one. I want to be fair about Peter, because it matters later. He was genuinely likable. By Monday morning, the second morning, he remembered how I took my coffee, and he didn't make a performance out of remembering. When the numbers embarrassed the store, he didn't blame the bookkeeper before me. He laughed and said, "We're a 100-year-old family business. Delia, that's 100 years to develop bad habits." He did impressions of the sales staff that were kind at the center of them. He asked me questions about my work and then actually listened to the answers, which I had not known was rare until I met somebody who did it. He was the first person in Harrow Bend who treated my job like a craft instead of like arithmetic somebody's wife did at a kitchen table. I liked him the way a slow leak becomes a flooded basement. 8 months later, he took me to Beaumont Avenue to meet his parents. Eleanor Whitlock received me in a living room that smelled like lemon oil and old money. She looked at me the way an appraiser looks at a chair someone claims is an antique, the slow scan, joint by joint, checking for glue. Her first question was not what I did, or how we met. She tilted her head, smiled with the front of her face, and said, "Marsh, now, whose people are the Marshes?" I said my mother worked at the title company, and that my people were mostly my mother. Something flickered behind her eyes and filed itself away. I thought it was disappointment. 5 years later, I learned it might have been arithmetic. After dinner, she walked me through the dining room, and I stopped at the china cabinet. Because I am my mother's daughter, and I look at things. Behind the glass sat 12 settings of pale pink porcelain, a thin gold band at the rim, stacked with the particular neatness of something nobody touches. "That's lovely," I said. "Do you use it at Christmas? That was my mother's dowry," Eleanor said, and then she closed the cabinet door. In 3 years in that house, I never once saw those plates on a table. Not Thanksgiving, not Christmas, not the Heritage Committee Gala she hosted every June for 40 people. We ate off her mother-in-law's china. I noticed. I filed it under, "Rich people are strange about heirlooms." Hold on to the pink china. It comes back at the very end, and when it does, it will explain everything. We married the spring I turned 28, at the club. Under a tent Eleanor selected, beside flowers Eleanor approved, in front of 200 guests of whom I could name maybe 40. I had wanted something small at the lake. I lost that negotiation so early, I'm not sure it ever officially opened. The one fight I won quietly, at the county clerk's office, alone, on a Tuesday. I kept my name, Delia Marsh. When Eleanor found out, the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Whitlock brides take the name," she said. "It's an honor other women have been grateful for." My mother, standing nearby in her one good dress, said nothing, but her eyebrow performed a complete sentence. And Peter did what I would spend the next 5 years watching him do. He stepped into the middle with his hands up, charming, apologetic in both directions at once. "Mom, it's her name. Delia. She means well." One sentence each. Exactly one. It sounds fair. It sounds like a man being decent to two women he loves. But when one side has the house, the name, the Sunday dinners, and the 200 guests, and the other side has only him, then splitting it down the middle is a form of choosing. I did not know that yet. I thought I had married a peacemaker. There was one more thing that weekend, and I filed that too. At the reception, near the bar, I overheard the club's events manager murmuring to Charles, something about the balance, something about the card, or perhaps the other account. Mr. Whitlock. Charles's parade wave faltered for exactly 1 second before he laughed and clapped the man's shoulder like they were old teammates. Rich people's paperwork. I told myself, the plumbing of castles. Across the room, my mother was watching the same conversation over the rim of her glass, and she was not surprised at all. It took me 3 years to understand that 2 people in that room knew what the Whitlocks were carrying. Neither of them was me. The plan was to live on Beaumont Avenue for a year, maybe 2, save, then buy our own place. "The East Wing has its own bath," Peter said. "It's practically an apartment." You can hear the word I should have questioned. Practically. I heard it too. I heard it the way you hear a smoke alarm chirping in another room and decide to deal with it after dinner. We moved in with my office plants and his record collection, and for 2 weeks it was a soft landing. A big kitchen, a garden, Sunday dinners with cloth napkins that somebody else ironed. Then, on a Tuesday, Eleanor knocked on our door holding a leather book. I was introduced to the household ledger the way you'd be introduced to gravity warmly. And as a fact that predated me, every couple under this roof contributes, she explained. Our share came to $800 a month, due the first, recorded in her hand, with everyone's initials running down a column like a rooming house in 1910. Nobody ever called it rent. It was a contribution. A contribution is something you volunteer. Rent is something you owe. Same number, 2 different worlds, and I lived 3 years in the wrong one. Then came the second ask, delivered as a compliment, which is how the expensive ones always arrive. "Peter tells me you're a wizard with books," she said. "The family's accounts are a shambles. Dear, it would mean so much," meaning I would also be doing the Whitlock family bookkeeping. For free. I charge $85 an hour to every client in this town. Roofers, florists, a man who rebuilds tractor engines. To my husband's family, I charged nothing, because I told myself the sentence that women have been trained to say like a virtue, I can't bill family. That was the most expensive sentence of my life. It was worth $55,000. And I said it with a smile, because I felt chosen the girl from the duplex, handed the keys to the castle's books, and here is what you learn when a 100-year-old name hands you its checkbook. Names don't cash. I had those accounts balanced inside a month, and what they balanced to was a slow, elegant leak. The furniture store's transfers to the family had thinned every year for a decade. 2 big-box competitors out by the highway will do that. The spending had not thinned by $1. Club dues, the Heritage Committee Gala, a landscaping service whose crew wore embroidered shirts, wine delivered to the house by the case. The household consumed like 1985, and the income arrived like a store nobody under 50 walked into anymore. So I did what I do for every client bleeding quietly. I built a gentle little proposal, trim the landscaping to twice a month, rebid the insurance, pause one of the 2 club memberships. Charles hadn't touched the golf course in 2 years. I presented it after Sunday dinner in the soft voice I use on proud old shop owners. Eleanor listened the way a queen listens to weather she has no intention of experiencing. Then she folded her hands and ended the meeting with the house motto. This family doesn't live like accountants. Dear, fine. But one line in those books would not leave me alone. Every month, $940.17 went out to something called BW Servicing, AutoPay, Memo Line Blank, going back years, in a perfectly straight column, the same to the penny. It wasn't insurance. It wasn't the store. There was no file for it, no folder, no explanation anywhere in the drawer of documents Eleanor had surrendered to me. I asked Eleanor. Charles handles that, she said, in the same tone as the motto. I asked Charles. He turned up the volume on a golf tournament and asked whether I'd ever seen anything like this young man's short game. And I let it go. Write that down somewhere for me. I let it go. That March, the county's delinquent property tax list ran in the Harrow Bend Ledger, the way it does every March. 4 columns of small type nobody reads. I read it, because reading small type is my whole occupation. The Whitlock name was in it. I assumed it was a county typo. I actually considered calling the assessor's office to have them fix it as a favor. So the family wouldn't be embarrassed. I never called, because I had decided that names like that don't appear on lists like that. And it was easier to correct the newspaper in my head than to correct the family in my mouth. There was one more page, deep in the store's loan file, a document I skimmed on a Thursday afternoon with a sandwich in my other hand, a line of credit, $240,000. And beneath the words, personal guarantee, my husband's signature. I wrote, ask about this on a sticky note. I stuck it to my monitor. It stayed there until the adhesive gave out, and it fell behind the desk. I never asked. I find fraud for a living. I once found $7,000 stolen from a hardware store across 38 small transactions over 2 years. And the owner cried in my office. So how did I not see it? I saw all of it. I just never let any of it sit on the same page. At the back of the Whitlock property, past the garden, there is a 2-story carriage house, red brick, slate roof, beautiful bones, abandoned to boxes and mice since sometime around the Apollo landings. The first time I walked through it, I did the dangerous thing a hungry heart does in a beautiful ruin. I furnished it in my head. Table by the north window, bookshelves along that wall, a door that closed behind me and opened for nobody who hadn't knocked. Eleanor stood in the doorway the entire time, and she watched me do it. That fall, over dessert, she made the offer with Peter nodding beside her like a notary. Fix it up. You two, that's your place. Every young Whitlock couple needs a nest, and heaven knows we're not using it. A 2-bedroom home on the family land. I teared up at that table, which I am certain was noted somewhere, but I am still my mother's daughter. So the next morning I asked, as lightly as I could, whether we might put something in writing, nothing dramatic, a page, a lease, a life estate, anything with ink on it. Eleanor looked at me with gentle, wounded amusement, the expression you'd give a child who asked you to sign for a hug. Family doesn't do paperwork, dear. I understand that sentence now, and it took me too long. Paperwork does not protect the strong. It only protects the weak, which is why it is always the strong who object to it. When someone tells you that writing it down would spoil the trust between you, what they are protecting is not the trust. It is their right to change their mind later, at no cost. With no witness, I asked Peter, privately, to press. He kissed my forehead and said 11 words I would be hearing in my sleep for years. They're my parents. Delia, I promise you, you can trust me. So here is what I did, and thank God for the habit. I said okay. I opened my savings $38,000, earned one small business ledger at a time, and I hired the contractor myself, a patient bear of a man named Gil Okonkwo, who argued with me happily in a gutted kitchen about where a window should go and lost. And I kept everything, every invoice, every transfer, every check, every change order, every receipt for every brass doorknob, in a green folder in my office. The final figure was $38,412.67. I know it that way because that is how I know all numbers. And because the state requires it for structural and electrical work, I filed for a building permit, number 2019-0447. 2 lines on that form matter: owner signature Charles M. Whitlock, and 4 lines down, financially responsible party Delia Marsh. I filed it because the law said to. I thought nothing else about it. 3 years later, that piece of paper was the only thing on their dining room table that nobody could argue with. The renovation took most of a year, and I loved it the way you love something you are secretly building your whole future inside. Peter came out on weekends, swung a hammer for an hour, and got photographed doing it. I came out every day I could and got sawdust in my hair. At Sunday dinners, Eleanor began mentioning me almost fondly, which should have been my warning, because her fondness always arrived with a moral attached. One night, passing the potatoes, she surveyed the table and delivered it, looking at no one. You know what I appreciate about Delia. She contributes. Everyone under this roof earns their keep. Heads nodded around the china like it was scripture. Charles said, "Here, here," Peter winked at me, and I sat there feeling God help me proud. It took 3 years to ask the right question. What was Peter's keep? What was Charles's? What did the 2 retrievers owe? Nobody ever handed me their price list. I was the only one at that table who had one. That Christmas, the 3-generation photograph in front of the fireplace happened the way it always did. Eleanor seated center, Charles's hand on her shoulder, Peter behind them. I took the picture. I remember thinking, next year I'll be in it. Hold that thought. It has an expiration date. By late winter, the carriage house had drywall, plumbing, paint, and my whole heart. Gil walked me through the last of it and then handed me a heavy old-fashioned brass key, warm in the palm, matched to the doorknobs I'd chosen. "Key to the castle, boss," he said, because he knew whose sweat and whose savings were inside those 4 walls. 2 days earlier, in the bathroom of our East Wing practically apartment, I had watched 2 pink lines appear. That Saturday, Peter and I stood in the empty upstairs bedroom, light coming through the window I had fought for and lost. He put his chin on my head. "Crib goes there," he said, and pointed at the corner. We told the family at Sunday dinner. I'm going to describe Eleanor Whitlock receiving news of her first grandchild carefully, because it happened in 2 distinct movements, like a very short symphony. Movement 1, genuine delight. She clapped her hands once and actually glowed. "A Whitlock baby," she said. And for 4 full seconds, I saw the woman Peter always swore was under the committee chair. Movement 2 arrived before the pie was cut. She folded her napkin. "Now, what are we thinking about that little business of yours? What do your months look like? Not how are you feeling? Not have you told your mother? What do your months look like? But if you speak fluent Eleanor, That sentence means, what does your cash flow look like? I said work was flexible, that bookkeeping travels well, that I'd managed harder things than a baby. She said, "Of course, dear," and wrote nothing down, because the ledger in her head never needed paper. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere in the pause between the clap and the napkin, my file in that house had been moved from asset to liability, pending review. At 24 weeks, I started bleeding on a Tuesday morning and spent the night listening to my daughter's heartbeat gallop on a monitor, which resets your entire definition of what matters. The diagnosis had a Latin name, the instructions were plain English, and they were not the bed rest people picture. Nobody prescribes that anymore. They were worse, in a way, because they were specific: no driving, no going to client sites, nothing over 10 pounds, pelvic rest, follow-up every 2 weeks. "And stress," the doctor said, looking at me the way doctors look when they mean it. "I need you to understand that stress here isn't emotional. It's a medical instruction." Peter held my hand and said all the right things in the room. My mother drove down before dawn, said almost nothing, which from Ruth is devotion, and left a cooler in the refrigerator with meals labeled by day of the week. And my income fell through the floor. I kept 4 clients I could serve from a laptop in bed. I lost 9. The first of the month came for the first time in 3 years. I put $500 in the household envelope instead of 8. I wrote a note explaining, promised to catch up, and slid it under her ledger like a schoolgirl leaving an apology on a teacher's desk. Nothing was said. That is the part people don't understand about houses like that. Nothing is ever said. Instead, 2 mornings later, the ledger appeared on my breakfast tray, open to the contributions page, my initials at the top of a column, and beside the current month, in Eleanor's fountain pen, a small, neat, red circle. That was all. A red circle, delivered with toast. I wasn't thrown out because I did something wrong. I was thrown out because I stopped being profitable. A family's real message to you is never in the year you're strong. It's in the first month you come up short. In the 7th month, near midnight, Peter came into our room and sat down on the floor beside the bed. He didn't turn on the lamp. "Do you want to go?" he said. "I mean it. I've got $11,000 in my own account. We could go." I sat up. My heart went somewhere behind my ears. "Yes," I said, 4 seconds. I counted them later for the rest of my life. Let me figure out how to tell my mother first. He never told her. He didn't betray me at that window. He betrayed me in those 4 seconds. 7 months earlier, on a bedroom floor. The window was just where I happened to see it. By the 3rd trimester, I was allowed downstairs for meals, and I sat at that cherrywood table like a chair that talked. Conversation flowed around me: the committee, the club, the neighbor's addition. If I mentioned the nursery, the subject changed within 2 sentences. I sat at the edge of that table for 3 years and never once noticed I was sitting at the edge. Eleanor developed a repertoire of stories with the same moral, delivered to the table at large while looking at no one, which meant me. When I was carrying Peter, she'd say, ladling soup. I hosted 40 people for Charles's parents' anniversary, on my feet all evening. Women in this family have never been delicate. And I want to be precise about Peter, because he never said one cruel thing to me, not one, in 5 years. That is what kept me longest. I had no evidence. I only had a list of the times he wasn't there. You cannot take a list of absences to anyone, they ask. But what did he do to you? And the answer, nothing sounds like the answer of a difficult wife. So I did what my mother's daughter does when the ground goes soft. I started my own ledger, a plain notebook in the nightstand, every payment dated, every carriage house invoice cross-referenced to the green folder. Not strategy. I want that understood. Just a bookkeeper stacking sandbags out of habit, one page at a time, the way some women pray. Then one night, passing the study door on my slow lap of the hallway, I heard Eleanor on the phone, her voice low and sharp in a way the Heritage Committee never got to hear. I understand the situation, but this household cannot carry a mouth that doesn't earn. The carriage house was finished. Gil walked me through it on a video call, tilting his phone room by room while I sat propped up on pillows. Brass doorknobs warm in the afternoon light. The window where I had lost the argument, which he had been right about, throwing a long rectangle of sun across the floor exactly where he said it would. "Ready when you are, boss," he said. I proposed the obvious. We'd move in before the baby came, get settled, set up the crib, 10 steps from the main house, but a door of our own. And the stalling began, so smooth it took me 2 weeks to recognize it as stalling. After the final inspection, dear, there was no final inspection. I had hired the contractor, I had signed the permit. There was nothing left to inspect, and I knew it. And I said nothing, because saying it would have required a sentence with an edge on it. The insurance needs sorting first. I offered to sort it. I was reminded that rest was medical. After the baby comes, we'll see about everything. We'll see. Then, on an afternoon in my 34th week, I watched from the East Wing window as 2 men in polo shirts carried folding tables, gala banners, and 40 boxes of Heritage Committee archives across the garden and into my carriage house. My kitchen, my brass, my window. They stacked them in the upstairs bedroom, in the corner where the crib was supposed to go, and Eleanor directed traffic from the garden path with one finger, pointing which of my rooms would hold which of her boxes. When I asked at dinner, she didn't even reload. Storage, temporarily. It's not as if anyone's living there. And then she took the key. I want to slow down here because of everything that happened in that house. This is the moment my body still remembers first. I kept the carriage house key on my everyday ring, a heavy, old-fashioned brass thing. It lived between my office key and my car key, and some evenings, I'm not ashamed to say it, I'd hold it in my coat pocket like a worry stone. It was the one object in the world that said promised. A week after the boxes went in, Eleanor stopped me in the front hall with her hand already out, palm up. "The painters need access, dear, and we can't be hunting you down all over the house in your condition. Let me hold the carriage house key. I'll return it when everything's settled. The painting was done. I had paid the painter. I had the invoice in the green folder." I looked at that open palm and I heard my mother's voice if they won't let you read it. That's your answer, and I heard the doctor's voice stress here is a medical instruction, and I was 36 weeks pregnant, standing in a hallway that had gone very quiet. I worked the brass key off the ring and set it in her hand. She closed her fingers around it and smiled. "There, isn't that simpler?" She never returned it, I asked once, 2 weeks later, carefully casual. "You're about to give birth," she said, not unkindly, which made it worse. What could you possibly need a key for every morning after that? I looked at the gap on my key ring. Remember the gap? We're coming back for it. 3 times I nearly got out. When she refused to put the carriage house in writing, I told myself I don't want to start this by not trusting them. On the bedroom floor, in those 4 seconds, I told myself he needs time. I'm pregnant. This isn't the moment. In the hallway with her palm out, I told myself stress is a medical instruction. I'll ask for it back after the baby. 3 times, and all 3 times, my reason for staying was a good reason. That's the part nobody warns you about. You don't stay because you're stupid. You stay because you're decent, because you're pregnant, because a doctor told you not to get upset. The trap doesn't use rope. It uses your own virtues. Iris came in June, 2 days past my due date, 14 hours, and the person in that room was Ruth, in the good suit she wears to things that matter, reading a paperback between contractions like a woman guarding a border, which is exactly what she was doing. Peter arrived at hour 11, hair wild, apologizing an emergency meeting at the store, something about the refinancing. He'd explain later. Eleanor visited that evening for 10 minutes by the clock on the wall. She wore the good pearls. She looked into the bassinet at her first grandchild and said, verbatim, "A girl," in the tone you'd use finding out the restaurant was out of the fish. Then she straightened the flowers Ruth had brought, mentioned that the house would be busy that weekend with the committee's summer event, and left a gift bag on the chair. Inside was a silver frame, empty, for the christening portrait, she said. Sit with that empty frame a moment. It is the most honest thing she ever gave me. That night, Ruth folded herself into the vinyl recliner, and in the dark, apropos of nothing, she said, "When they discharge you, you'll go back to that house. If anything happens, anything, you call me before you argue with anyone. Promise me." I laughed. She didn't. I promised. I didn't ask why. She'd have told me, and I wasn't ready. And I think she knew both things. Discharge was Thursday at 10. At 9:40, Peter texted store emergency. "Can't get away. Grab a cab. See you at home. We'll celebrate." The nurse wheeling me down asked, "Who's picking you up?" "My husband's circling the block." I said, "You can't park out front." I lied to a nurse to protect the dignity of the man who had just abandoned me. If you have ever done that, you don't need me to explain anything else. The cab smelled like pine air freshener. I strapped my daughter's carrier into the back seat with hands that were still shaking from the wheelchair ride, and I said, "God forgive me." Beaumont Avenue, the big one with the stone gate, proudly, 3 years of tuition paid into that family, and I still flashed the name like a keycard. The cab pulled away and left us at the curb, and I stood there a second, adjusting the carrier, looking up at the house. Every window was closed. In June. On the porch, in the shade, sat 2 suitcases. You know a suitcase's silhouette the way you know your own handwriting. Those were mine, the Navy set, a wedding gift from a cousin, and folded on top of the nearest one, in a neat square, was my winter coat. Somebody had packed for me for a season I wouldn't be here for. I carried my daughter up those steps on legs I couldn't feel, doing the thing where your brain offers you better explanations at a discount. We're being moved to the carriage house. These are the first load. My key went into the deadbolt half a knuckle and stopped. The brass plate around it was still bright with the fresh scratch of a locksmith's screwdriver. I rang the bell of the house I had lived in for 3 years, holding a baby born into its name the day before, standing beside my own packed luggage, footsteps. The door opened 4 inches and stopped on the chain. The chain, for me, behind her, deeper in the hall, a floorboard complained. And then nothing. A presence choosing to remain a presence. Eleanor's face was arranged like a form letter. Delia, not dear, my name, served cold. Peter needs a clean start, and this household needs contributors. You've been a lovely guest, but guests don't stay forever. A guest. 3 years, and I had made guest. Eleanor, I said, because the human brain stays loyal to its last working map. I live here. Let's sort this out when Peter gets home. He's at the store. She tilted her head and gave me one small, patient, curatorial smile through the gap in her own front door. Who do you think packed the suitcases, dear? Dear was back for that one. It had to be. And then, while I stood there relearning gravity, she delivered it in the calm budget committee voice of a woman reading out a line item she has already decided to cut. Everyone under this roof earns their place. You've had a difficult year, and we're all sympathetic. But sympathy is not a line of credit. There is no room in this house for a useless wife. The door closed, not slammed, closed, with a click. Which is worse. Slamming is at least a conversation. I stood on the porch of the finest house in Harrow Bend, holding a one-day-old baby next to a winter coat folded for a winter I would apparently be spending elsewhere. And above me, I heard the soft complaint of an old window frame. Second floor, east wing, our bedroom. I stepped back off the porch into the sun and looked up. Peter, arms crossed, close enough to have heard every word through a pane of glass he did not open. We looked at each other for 3 full seconds. Then he looked away first. So I kept my promise. I didn't knock again. I didn't argue with anyone. I sat down on the bigger suitcase, got out my phone, and called my mother. Mom, it happened. The thing you made me promise about. 4 seconds of silence on the line. Then Ruth's voice, so level it frightened me more than shouting would have. Are you and the baby safe? Are you sitting down 20 minutes? Click. No questions about what, or why, or how could they, as though she had been sitting by the phone for 3 years with her coat already on. Across the street, a curtain twitched, then the corner house, then 2 more. 4 houses watched me sit on that suitcase with a one-day-old baby. 4. Nobody came out. And I'm not angry at them, I understand them. In a small town, the Whitlocks weren't neighbors. The Whitlocks were weather. You don't argue with weather. You go inside and you close your windows. I did inventory, because inventory is what I have instead of screaming. $27,600 into that envelope. First of the month, 36 months, $38,412.67 into the brick building, whose slate roof I could see over the garden hedge, a building now full of another woman's gala banners. I had bought and paid for my own eviction, and tipped on the way out, and then something happened that I did not expect, and it is the reason I can tell you this story instead of hiding it. Here is the strange mercy of hitting the exact bottom of something. The shame that had been idling in me for 3 years, the low, constant hum of not enough, not yet. Contribute more quietly changed its address. It stopped being mine. It walked up those porch steps and moved in with the people behind the chain lock. I was still sitting there doing that arithmetic when the gray Camry came around the corner. My mother's sensible, paid-off sedan, traveling 5 miles an hour faster than Ruth Marsh has ever driven in her life. Both front doors opened at once. "Baby first," my mother said, and held Iris for 10 full seconds with her eyes closed, like drinking water after a long shift. Then she handed my daughter back, nodded at the silver-haired man, and said, "Delia, this is Warren Deeb. He's been my attorney for 11 years. Get in the car, both of you. I don't do business on other people's sidewalks." We drove 1 block and stopped under the big elm on Concord Street. Engine off. From the back seat, Warren spoke first. "Ma'am, what they just did has a name. Self-help eviction. In this state, it's a misdemeanor. You've resided there 3 years and contributed to the household. You're a lawful occupant. I can call the sheriff's office right now, and they will escort you back inside within the hour. I looked down at my daughter, 31 hours old, asleep with her fist against her cheek. No, I said. The first day of my daughter's life is not going in a police report. That isn't my leverage. I heard my own voice go flat and professional, the way it does at audits. That's my receipt. Warren didn't argue. He wrote something down. Months later, I would learn what a clause stating we would not pursue the unlawful lockout, in exchange for the delivery of every one of my belongings, undamaged, within 48 hours. Awesome. Then, my mother opened the folder on the center console and turned my understanding of Harrow Bend upside down like an hourglass. The letterhead said, Bellwether Notes, LLC. I heard my own voice say it before my brain caught up. BW Servicing, $940.17. Memo line blank, 36 months. The servicer collects it, my mother said, almost apologetically. The note behind it is mine. I do this for a living, so I didn't need the translation, but I'll give you mine. The Whitlock house, the stone gate, the oak door. The chain lock carried a mortgage, not from a bank. Banks had said no back in 2016 when the store's numbers went soft and Charles needed $92,000 to keep it breathing. So they borrowed privately, at 9% over 15 years, secured by the family home, $940.17 a month. And private notes get bought and sold like used pianos. 4 years ago, a broker's flyer crossed my mother's desk. She recognized the address before she finished the first line. And Ruth Marsh, who has never bought a lottery ticket in her life, sold $92,000 of bonds and CDs she had laddered for 28 years, exactly the face value, not a dollar over, and bought the mortgage on the Whitlock family home. I don't own their house, she said, correcting me the way she'd correct a rookie at the escrow desk. I own the debt sitting on their house, different things, on most days. Why? I asked. She kept both hands at 10 and 2 on a parked steering wheel, because my daughter was going to be living under that roof, and I'd read what was holding the roof up. You buy the field between your house and a wildfire. Delia, that's all this ever was. I didn't want a throne. Thrones need dusting. Then she was quiet for a second, and what came next was the only apology her face makes. And I was afraid. I was afraid that if you knew, you'd think I bought it to pull you back, that it was just another chain, only mine. I've asked myself that question for 4 years, every time the auto pay ran. A pause. I'm still not sure of the answer. How did they never find out? I said. Their lawyer could have looked. Warren answered, dry as an audit. Bellwether is registered in Wyoming with an agent in Cheyenne. Entirely legal, entirely common, but the assignment has been on file at the county recorder's office for 4 years. Book 412, page 88. Public. Anyone could pull it. He shrugged. The trouble is that nobody reads their own paperwork. And as of 90 days ago, he added, the Whitlocks are $11,300 in arrears, which makes today less unusual than you'd think. That night, in my old bedroom at the duplex, in a crib assembled by Warren Deeb of all people, in a dress shirt and reading glasses, I fed Iris at 2 in the morning and wrote 3 lines on the back of her feeding log. 1. Burn it down, foreclose. 2. Use the note to force the door open. Go back as the wife with leverage. 3. Collect what is mine to the dollar and close the account. I looked at option 2 the longest. I'll admit that, living in that house knowing they had to be polite to me, and then I heard it in Eleanor's voice earns their place and understood that option 2 was the same house with the collar on the other neck. I won't lie to you and say I forgave anyone. I didn't. I sat in that car and wanted an auction sign zip-tied to that stone gate badly enough that my teeth ached. The reason I didn't isn't that I'm good. It's that I did the math. Foreclosing means I still have an open account with that family, court dates, appeals. Some Christmas 10 years out when my daughter asks why. Revenge isn't an ending. Revenge is another relationship. With worse terms, I didn't want to beat the Whitlocks. I wanted to owe them nothing in any direction, including hatred. My phone lit up. Peter, Mom went too far today. Give it a few weeks to cool down and I'll bring you home. I put the phone face down and drew a circle around option 3. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at my mother's house. A COBRA notice. My health coverage and irises had been terminated. Effective the day I was discharged. To continue it, $1,870 a month, out of pocket. She hadn't only called a locksmith, she had called human resources. And I remember thinking, very calmly, this was a decision made at a desk, not in a temper. Tempers forget the insurance. Warren drew up one page at my mother's kitchen table, one the notice of default and acceleration, sent certified Tuesday, recorded at the county office at 9 the previous morning. 2. My civil claim, $38,412.67 in unjust enrichment, documented by a green folder they didn't know existed and by permit 2019-0447, signed by Charles Whitlock. My belongings intact within 48 hours. A separation agreement, plus a filing for temporary orders. 3 the trade, if they pay and behave. Ruth restructures the arrears and sells the note to an institutional servicer. Nobody loses a house because of my broken heart. Warren looked at it over his reading glasses. 30 years of practice, he said. The reasonable ones are always the scariest. Then he tapped the green folder. Your mother opens the door, Ms. Marsh. But what goes on that table is yours. I've never been handed a record this clean. You don't need me. You need an envelope. They proposed a meeting downtown. Neutral ground, dignified. No, I said. The papers concern the house. The papers can visit the house. 10 o'clock Thursday. We use the front door. Thursday morning. I put on the blazer I wear to client audits. Not new, not borrowed. Mine, bought with bookkeeping money. I left Iris with Mrs. Adiemi next door, who raised 4 babies and treats guarding one as a paid vacation. In the car, my mother handed me the folder and said one thing. You knock. We drove through Harrow Bend slowly. The stone gate came up on the right like a headline. 3 even raps on 100-year-old oak. Footsteps, the chain sliding off, and Eleanor Whitlock opened her front door in full regalia. Pearls and posture, expression preloaded the form letter. The guest doesn't stay. She got as far as Delia. This is not wine, before Warren stepped forward with the mild bearing of a man delivering a casserole, and held out a business card and a single white envelope. Warren Deeb, ma'am, Counsel for Bellwether Notes, LLC. Holder of the note and mortgage recorded against this property. You'll want to read this before you finish that sentence. He paused. Courteous as a Sunday. The legal part was done Tuesday. The post office handled that. The recording has been on file at the county since 9 yesterday morning. What you're holding is a courtesy copy. I brought it as a courtesy. I had 3 years of that woman's posture, and this was new. It broke from the top down, in stations. The eyebrows, then the set of the mouth, then the shoulders, then the hand that went out and found the doorframe of the house her name was mortared into, and held it the way you hold a railing on ice. My mother, who had said nothing, spoke one sentence in the voice of 30 years of escrow desks. The servicer collects it. Eleanor, I own it. Shall we do this in the doorway, or at your table? I've heard so much about that table. And for the first time since the invention of the Whitlock family, the door on Beaumont Avenue opened all the way for a marsh. I noted, from a great inner distance, that I was seated at the middle of that table, 3 years in that house, and never once the middle. Warren laid the papers out like surgical tools. The note, endorsed and assigned, the recorded mortgage, the payment history, $940.17, memo line blank, marching backward for years, and the arrears, itemized, 3 missed installments, $2,820.51, late charges, $141.03, delinquent property taxes advanced by the note holder to protect the lien, $7,902. Force-placed insurance after their policy lapsed, $436.46. Total, $11,300. Nobody touched the pages. Last March, I saw this family's name on the delinquent tax list in the ledger. I said, I assumed the county had made a typo. It hadn't. You stopped paying property taxes and let the insurance lapse and kept paying club dues. Charles was summoned from the den and arrived already gray, which told me that default and acceleration were not new words to him. Only the name behind them was. Then I put down the last page myself. Permit 2019-0447. Owner signature, Charles M. Whitlock, financially responsible party, Delia Marsh. This isn't a promise at a dinner table. This is your signature on the county's public record, confirming that you knew, you consented, and you knew who was paying. Peter came down the same stairs he had watched me from, took in the table his wife, her mother, a lawyer, the family paper laid out like an autopsy, and stopped on the bottom step. Warren set down one more sheet, a letter, dated 2020. That year, Mrs. Whitlock applied to subdivide the rear carriage house for separate sale. This note carries standard due on sale and partial release provisions. No portion of the collateral may be subdivided, conveyed, or granted long-term occupancy without the note holder's written consent. The application was denied. By this letter, Eleanor understood, slowly, that the person who had refused her that year was sitting across from her now. You didn't cheat me out of a house, Eleanor, I said. You took my money and used it to improve the collateral securing my mother's loan. For 3 years, every brick I bought made her position a little stronger. You never had anything to give me. You only had something to take. And then she sat down, not the committee dissent. She dropped the last 2 inches, and the pearls swung. And for a moment she was a 63-year-old woman at a table she had spent a life defending. You think I was born at the head of this table, she said, to the portraits, to no one. I came into this family with 1 suitcase. I ate at the children's table for 10 years. 10 Christmases before Charles's mother let me hold a serving spoon. Everyone who enters this house pays. That is how a name survives. I paid, and I paid, and I... She heard herself in front of a bookkeeper. The sentence died in the middle, and her eyes came up and found mine. And for 2 seconds, the only honest ones we ever shared, we understood each other perfectly. I didn't gloat. There was nothing left to win from her. How many years did you pay? 10. And after 10 years, who declared you paid in full? She opened her mouth, then she closed it, because the answer was that her mother-in-law died. Then you didn't win, Eleanor. You inherited the cashier's chair, and you sat in it for 40 years, waiting for someone to invoice. I nodded toward the china cabinet. 40 years. And you never once used your own mother's china. 12 settings. Right there. Never on the table. That was your bill, and you paid it with me. I slid one page across. This is the invoice. $38,412.67. Not because it's what you owe me. You owe me $121,092.67, including 36 months of bookkeeping I never billed. But because it is the only number with your family's signature on it, I'm not claiming what I feel, I'm claiming what I can prove. That is the entire difference between my house and yours. The rest I'm writing off. Accountants are allowed to write off bad debt. It's the only mercy my profession permits. And I'm using it on you. Then, I walked out to the porch and set the brass key on the white railing, where the suitcases had been. I'm returning the only thing of yours I ever wanted. Delia, Peter, from the doorway. You know where my mother's door is. You've never once used it. I walked down those 6 steps at my own pace, with my mother and my lawyer falling in beside me like a small parade of exactly the right size. The Henderson's curtain twitched. Let it take notes. In the car, Ruth started the engine, looked both ways like a woman who has never rolled a stop sign, and said, "You gave the key back." I did. Good. That was the entire debrief. And it was enough because we both knew what I had really left on that railing. Not brass. The idea I had carried since the lit windows of my childhood that somewhere behind a stone gate was a table with my name on it. If I could just contribute enough to deserve it. I had finally read that contract all the way through. I declined to renew. Grief has good manners. It waited until we were home. That evening at the duplex, I fed Iris, handed her to her grandmother, went into my old bedroom, closed the door, and came apart quietly for a while. Not for Eleanor, not even mostly for Peter, for the family in the window, the carved roast, the 3-generation photograph, the whole beautiful stage set I had paid to stand inside of. That dream had been mine since I was 8. I buried it at 31 in a duplex bedroom with band posters still on the closet door. Here is how the accounts settled. They paid, not graciously, but they paid $38,412.67 inside 6 months, raised the old money way, which is to say the boat went first and then Charles's antique roadster, the one from the parade. My boxes arrived that first Saturday, intact, and packed, I noticed, with genuine care. Sweaters folded along their seams, teacups wrapped one at a time, my ledger magnifier rolled inside a handkerchief. And I understood immediately. Because I had studied that language for 3 years, it was her apology. She did not know how to say things. She only knew how to put them away neatly. That was the one thing she had ever been taught to do with a feeling. We signed a separation agreement that Saturday. Temporary orders came 3 weeks later, joint legal custody. Primary physical custody with me, and the divorce was final, 11 months on, uncontested. Peter takes his Saturdays with Iris at the park, or at my mother's kitchen table, where he is served coffee and watched like a teller's drawer. He is gentle with her. He was always gentle. Gentle was never the missing ingredient. On the first of those Saturdays, holding her beautifully, he explained that leaving the store would drop the $240,000 guarantee onto him personally. He said it as though it were a reason. It wasn't a reason. It was a price. And he had known his since 2017. He didn't choose them over me. He had signed himself away before I ever arrived, and I was the only person in that house who ever saw the signature and didn't read it. My mother kept her end to the letter. "I retired in September," she said, signing the transfer papers. "I bought the note in November. Those 2 months were not a coincidence." The arrears were restructured, and the note sold at a modest and unromantic profit to a pension fund's servicing arm in Ohio, where the Whitlock name is now 7 digits in a portfolio between a ranch house in Toledo and a duplex in Akron. It is the most democratic thing that has ever happened to that family. Nobody foreclosed. Nobody had to. The following spring, a tasteful sign appeared outside the stone gate, and the finest house in Harrow Bend sold in August to an orthodontist's family with a trampoline. God bless them. The Whitlocks moved to a townhouse near the club. The Heritage Committee meets in Eleanor's front room now, and the archives are in a rented storage unit. A borrowed name came due all on its own. I just declined to keep making the payments for it. I am not proud of everything. The day that sign went up, I drove past, slowly, twice, then I went home, felt bad about myself for about 40 minutes, fed my daughter, and forgot. If you are waiting for me to say I transcended it, no, I ran out of time. Most of letting go isn't forgiveness. Most of it is being busy with something you love more. Marsh Ledger Works reopened that fall. My 9 lost clients came back and brought friends, all but the florist, who takes 40% of her revenue from a single name and apologized 4 times in 2 minutes. I told her not to worry. In a small town, telling the truth is an expense, and not everyone can afford it. That is how families like that last 100 years, not because they are strong, but because opposing them is too expensive for ordinary people. And a quiet practice grew up on its own. Referral by whisper, young women, engaged or newly married, bringing me prenuptial agreements, family investment opportunities, one household ledger that made my hands cold. I read every line with them, the way my mother read mine too late, and her own always. I never charge for those appointments. Call it a tithe to the escrow desk. Iris turned 1 in June. My mother made us take a picture on the duplex porch, Ruth in her work blazer, me holding the baby, all 3 of us squinting into the afternoon sun, slightly off-center because Mrs. Adeyemi's thumb was near the lens. It is objectively a bad photograph. It is also the only 3-generation portrait I have ever been in. I put it in the silver frame Eleanor gave me at the hospital and hung it in my office. She handed me an empty frame and told me to wait for a ceremony. I filled it with the people who showed up on the day I needed them. I have looked at it every working day for a year and never once seen a fireplace missing from it. My keyring carries 2 keys now, the office and a small rented house on Garnet Street, 4 doors down from my mother, with a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs and a bassinet. 2 chairs, I don't buy the spare anymore. A spare chair is an invitation addressed to somebody who never asked to come. The gap on the ring is gone. My mother taught me to read it before I signed it. I listened. I just didn't understand that some contracts have no paper that you sign them by sitting down at somebody else's table and believing that if you contribute enough, one day they'll write your name in. I signed mine at 8 years old, through a lit window on the walk home from school. It took me 23 years to read it through. And in the last line, there was a clause, nobody mentioned the rent on a seat never stops rising. And there is no maturity date. I don't hate Eleanor Whitlock. I did. Now I think about her the way a bookkeeper thinks about an account. She is not the villain of this story. She is the previous chapter of it. Somebody stood her on a sidewalk 40 years ago and told her she had to pay to come inside. And she believed them, and then she spent a life proving the price had been legitimate. And the only way to prove that is to collect it from somebody else. That is how these things survive generations. Not through cruelty, through people who were charged once and came to believe the bill was valid. I chose not to believe it. That is all I did. And I hope my daughter never has to choose. Iris woke at 2, right on schedule. I fed her in the dark of my childhood bedroom, her hand around my finger, and I told her the first true thing I ever taught her: you will never have to earn a seat at any table of mine. If you remember one thing from this, remember the 3 questions I ask every woman who walks into my office. 1, if you stop being useful to that family tomorrow, what happens to where you live? Don't tell me what you think. Show me the piece of paper that answers it. 2, whose name is on the property you're putting your money and your work into? Is yours anywhere on it? 3. When you ask to put it in writing, what is their first reaction? The answer to the 3rd matters more than the first 2 combined. I won't ask what you'd have done on that porch. Everybody knows what they'd do on a porch. I'll ask the harder one 3 years before that porch. What did you let go? We all have a $940 line with a blank memo. What's yours? Put it in the comments, not for me, for you. Send this to the woman you're thinking about right now. You know who you're thinking about. And if you want to stay with stories where quiet women keep the receipts and the endings are earned instead of gifted, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.